Welcome back to Open Line tonight. Tonight's topic, sexual assault and sexual harassment, and really what to do if you are a victim. I invite you to call in with your questions, your concerns, even your experiences through the system, maybe after you have been a victim. There's worthwhileness in hearing those stories. 615-737 plus is the number to call. I guess I should say there is value in hearing your experiences. I have two wonderful ladies here with me tonight. Jessica Labenberg joining me. Thank you so very much. The director of the Sexual Assault Center, and Sharon Travis, advocacy director. Thank you all so very much. I want to talk about the Sexual Assault Center. You have two locations, right?
Yes.
Okay. Where and go from there.
So we have a location in Nashville as well as in Clarksville, and we have our full services of clinical therapy options as well as advocacy services, which I oversee.
And Sharon, I do want to talk about the advocacy side of things, or the outreach side of things.
Yes.
And we were talking before the show about how very important it is to get in front of this issue, and that's the part of it that you really like and enjoy. And you were telling me some stories that are pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Recently, I just did a group of college students, of athletes, and so they were split by the female athletes and the male athletes, and so it was interesting. We did this exercise on consent, so it was really interactive, and it was really taking scenarios and putting themselves into it and telling us how they would navigate through it, as opposed to me just saying what consent was, right? So we know the elements of consent is that it has to be willing, coherent, conscious, ongoing, and I'm missing one. It'll come back to me. Okay. Okay, and so and all 6 of those elements have to exist. Enthusiastic, okay? And so all of those pieces have to be there. So as they're doing their exercise, we're talking about where we were, and so when we got to the scenario that talked about alcohol, the girls were like, as soon as alcohol was mentioned and came into the picture, their red light and their red flags went up. Where the gentlemen were like, well, she's still there, she's still into it, you know, she didn't say no, she didn't stop me, right? And so for them, they kept moving even to the point where she fell off the bed and got back up. Oh. Okay, so at that point they were like, well, I'm not sure. So as your previous caller mentioned, there is an element of coercion that comes with this, and the power dynamic. And so making them aware that if someone is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they cannot give consent under any circumstance, right? And so we use like the Beyonce Drunken Love song as an example of what the culture might say about that. But Beyonce and Jay-Z have a relationship where they've worked consent out. These are things that they have communicated, and clearly communicated is another element of it. Sure. And so being clearly communicated and having a relationship and knowing what that looks like, that's fine for them to be drunk in love and do what they do, but it's not okay for you to do it. And here's what you have to make sure is in place.
I do want to talk about something that was in our news quite a bit, was the Vanderbilt rape trial, and I think equally as heartbreaking as the rape was the fact that there were other people in the room and they allowed it to continue, from the men who were charged to a roommate who was sleeping in a bed and woke up and then just left the room and did nothing.
Right.
Did nothing to help that woman.
Well, there were people in the courtyard who saw them carrying her up. There were people in the hallway who saw her being carried in and out, and it was weeks later, a couple of weeks later, before it came to light because of something inadvertently that happened. It wasn't like anybody ever came forward and spoke up.
You're exactly right.
And so I feel like you can speak truth to people who you know, and so many of them knew these guys that they saw. They could have said, hey, that's not all right. You know what you're doing is not cool. And perhaps it may have stopped something. We don't know. And the fact that we don't know is the problem. That no one said anything for us to say, well, they pushed me off or brushed me off, right?
Why is that? I mean, how could everyone just turn their head?
So the bystander theory says that you are less likely to do something in a group than you would if you were by yourself. Because if you're by yourself, you hold yourself more accountable, or you think, well, there's no one else to help. But in groups, you think someone else might get it. Or you don't want to deal with the peer pressure that comes from that. And so what we have to change is that group think.
Yeah.
You know, and make it okay to say, hey, it's not okay. I can stand up and use my voice. And I think it's important for males to know that they have a role in this. Because while we know the majority of rapists are male, not every male rapes.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so the males who don't have to use their voice. They have to be able to speak to their friends who they see out of line, or you're at a party, or it's a frat thing, or a athlete thing, that these are your teammates and you can hold them accountable. You have a team culture. And does your team culture include rape culture too? And if it does, then speak to it. Stand up against it. Coaches can do that. The teammates can do it. The one thing that I found encouraging with the college students that I worked with was that some of them said, you know, when I put it to them, if you saw one of your teammates doing this, they were like, oh, I would not be okay with that.
Yeah.
I would totally stand up and say, knock it off. And felt like that they had that ability to say that, and felt like they would be respected and heard. But I also had some other athletes who said, you know, snitches get stitches, I'm walking away.
Yeah.
You know, and so there is a culture to how you handle that.
Don't you think that it starts at the beginning of the season and it needs to just be put out there right away from an authority figure that these players admire, or, you know, that the students look up to a mentor or something? I mean, where do you start on a college campus?
I wish we started in high school campuses and middle school campuses where we are giving people the language to be able to be empowered to say stop bullying. It doesn't necessarily have to be about sex. It starts with the little things. So if we begin to talk about consent in little ways, respecting space, respecting my desk, asking permission to touch me, even if you're just going to shake my hand, whatever it is, if you go to reach someone's hand and they don't give it back, don't be offended. Respect that they have the right to say no. And so just kind of giving them the verbiage. The other thing I found concerning with the college students that we worked with this week were the girls did not feel like they could say no. And they actually felt like in one of the scenarios that the girl was leading the guy on in the alcohol scenario because she didn't say no. And so I don't think and I don't want to make this kind of a binary thing either, because we know it happens in LGBTQ plus communities as well, and it also happens to men.
Yes.
And so we, you know, at the Sexual Assault Center, we serve them all, the men, the women.
Yeah.
And
you know, I read on your website 1 in 4 girls will be the victim of sexual assault by the time she turns 18. 1 in 6 boys. And I was shocked at that it wasn't a bigger gap in that. I was shocked that it was 1 in 6 boys. Why should, I mean, I don't know. I just was shocked by that. Is that normal?
I actually think it's higher. These are just reported cases. So if we're really looking at males, how difficult is it for a male to report rape? And a lot of times with males, it's under the age of 14, because that's where the power dynamic is there. And it's often another male. And so how tough is that to come forward and say?
Yes. And you know, one thing, I read this article that was about Anthony Edwards. You remember he played the doctor on ER. I mean, he's been in lots of things. It came out, I think it was last week, and he came out and said, I was the victim. I was a producer or director when he was a teen, and some of his friends who were in the acting business with him, and they called themselves, like, you know, the gang of friends who were, you know, a victim of this man. And I never read comments on Facebook or, you know, online articles, but the first one just I saw, and I gasped, because the person said, you know, this went on for 5 or 6 years. He must have enjoyed it. And I thought, how can people still believe this? But they do. They do.
I think the comment that bothers me the most is, why did they wait so long to come forward?
And can you explain? I mean, you work with victims. Can you explain why people wait if someone doesn't get it?
There's so many barriers to disclosing. The power dynamic that you see in an abusive relationship, whether it's a sexually abusive relationship, the majority of the time, close to 90% of the time, the offender is known to the victim. So there's cross relationships that bleed into families and friends. In the case of sexual harassment in the workplace, which is getting so much verbiage and media attention right now, and people saying, why was nobody talking about this? It's the thing everybody knew was happening. It's power and control. A person in power in an employment situation using exerting that, and as an employee having to potentially have that decision between their livable income
yes.
and lifestyle versus a safe workplace. And that's a terrible position to be in, and it can be a barrier to coming forward.
Yeah. You know, that hits home too, because we had the issue with Kurt Webster, a big PR agent here in town, a publicity agent for many of the country music artists, and he ran a shop. I mean, he was the boss at this small public relations firm right here in Nashville, and the stories have come forward. He was, you know, vile comments to women, assaulting men allegedly that worked for him. But where were they supposed to go? Because the buck really stopped with him. He is the boss. He is their livelihood. So if someone who is watching is in a situation like that, what do they do?
Know that you have options outside of responding or disclosing within your employment. A huge barrier sometimes to reaching out for support and for help is not knowing where to go. So the Sexual Assault Center is a great place. We are here to believe you and support you. And we'll help you understand your options and your rights, because it's going to look different for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Reverend Fuzz on the phone, and Reverend, I always appreciate you calling in and watching as well. What would you like to add tonight?
Well, I'm real sorry about this epidemic of sexual propriety that really is just all over the world, probably, but here in America, it doesn't deserve. One thing I've noticed about it, I asked the district attorney why so much emphasis on helping women, what about the men, and he said it was 96% of the people who were victims were female. So that's really kind of horrendous. And one of my favorite things is there's no college or university that has a degree in love or romance. And sex and pursuit, your guest was talking about consent. I'm thinking about pursuit. It should not be a part of pursuit, especially in the workplace of separate genders. It should not be even, not consent. You don't seek consent. On the workplace, it should never be allowed to be pursuit of, and it must be illegal. And it's okay for men and women to be attracted to each other, what they call it physically or romantically, but if they don't cross that line, the forbidden zone, I read that in 1989 in Scientific Today or something, if they don't cross the line in that forbidden zone, they'll become, that feeling will pass, and they'll become powerful force to male and female friend, platonic friend, and I've seen that what ain't nothing better than having a woman who thinks of you as her brother. Wow, sisters love their brothers. But it should never, we need a law that does not allow people to cross that line. Men need help with that. They are attracted to women, but they got to, if we're not going to teach them not to do it and why and to have etiquette and chivalry, we've got to require them and then enforce that law. I'm hearing field settlements. What happened to breaking the law and like having a penalty that costs you to go to jail or pay some fines or something? You know, but those are the thoughts. But we have a real plague. But in the workplace, it needs to stop. It's got to be outlawed. I have a daughter, and that's what I was burning about. My daughter, I'm thinking of her having to go through this kind of stuff. I'm ready to go to war. I love her. She's my only child, and you're treating her like this, and I know it's happening is what I'm hearing. So do more of this, but help educate the men and be critical of them, but they need to be educated. There's nobody teaching men, but there are other friends, other guys, and what do they know? Who taught them? We need universities and professors of psychologists who know about love and romance. What couple has taken 30 hours of that marriage and the family, or you know, that social unit, just studied that together to know what they're doing, where they get their ideas from, and who's doing what and who's who. But those are my comments. Thank you for your time. And
thank you, Reverend Fuzz, as always. And you know,
thank you.
The Reverend brings up a great point. We're going to take another quick commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk laws that we have here in Tennessee that are working and ones that need improvement. I'm sure you guys are well versed in that. When we come back, more on that. Stay with us.
You got that.